The stars looked the same as they had for the past 3 years, Jake Morrison thought as he pressed his face against the cold observation window of the Endeavour. Thousands of tiny lights scattered across the endless black, each one a sun that might have planets around it, might have life on it, might have people looking back at him right now wondering if they were alone in the universe too. Jake knew he wasn't alone in the technical sense because there were 4,000 other humans on this ship with him, all heading toward a new world called Haven Prime that would become humanity's second home. But sometimes being surrounded by people made you feel more alone than being by yourself, especially when those people all seemed to have someone special to share the journey with. Captain Morrison, as everyone called him during duty hours, was 32 years old and had been chosen for this mission because he was one of the best pilots in Earth's space fleet. He could fly anything with engines and wings, could navigate through asteroid fields that would make other pilots wet their pants, and had reflexes that the medical team said were in the top 1% of all humans tested. What he couldn't do was find a wife. The ship's computer had tried to help, of course, running its matchmaking program on all the single people aboard the Endeavour. The artificial intelligence had access to personality profiles, genetic compatibility charts, shared interest databases, and psychological evaluations for everyone. It had successfully paired up over 600 couples in the first year of the journey. Some of those couples had even gotten married in the ship's chapel, and a few had started having babies in the medical bay. But Jake remained stubbornly unmatched, along with 47 other people who the computer couldn't find partners for. Most of them were older folks who had already been married and lost their spouses, or people who had specifically requested to remain single for the journey. Jake wasn't in either category, which made his situation feel worse somehow. He had tried talking to the single women on the ship. Of course he had, but every conversation felt forced and awkward. They were all nice enough people, but there was never that spark, that feeling of connection that made you want to spend the rest of your life with someone. The closest he had come was with Dr. Rebecca Torres, the ship's head of agriculture, who shared his love of old movies and bad jokes, but even that fizzled out after a few dates when they both realized they were better as friends. The observation deck was usually crowded during the day's shift, with people coming to look out at space and dream about their new home, but Jake had started coming here during the night shift when it was empty. He could think better when he was alone, and lately he had been doing a lot of thinking about what his life would be like on Haven Prime. He would have his own house eventually, probably something small but comfortable with a view of whatever Haven Prime's version of mountains or oceans looked like. He would have his job flying supply runs between the colony and the orbital stations, which was important work that he enjoyed. He would have friends and hobbies, and maybe even pets if the terraforming team successfully introduced Earth animals to the new world. But he wouldn't have someone to share it all with, someone to come home to at the end of the day, someone to laugh at his stories and tell him about theirs, someone to hold hands with while they watched Haven Prime sunset over whatever beautiful landscape they would call home. That thought made his chest feel tight and empty at the same time. The ship's corridors were quiet around him, just a constant low hum of the engines and life support systems that had become background noise after 3 years. Somewhere in the residential sections, people were sleeping next to their spouses or partners, probably dreaming about the new life they would build together. Somewhere else, parents were checking on their children, making sure they were safe and warm in their beds. Jake pressed his forehead against the observation window and felt the vibration of the ship's massive engines through the metal and plastic. The Endeavour was humanity's greatest achievement, a city-sized vessel that could travel between the stars and keep 4,000 people alive and healthy for decades if necessary. It represented the best of human engineering, determination, and hope for the future. So why did Jake feel so empty inside when he looked at it all? Maybe it was because he was tired, he told himself. 3 years of ship duty could wear anyone down, even with the recreation facilities and entertainment programs designed to keep people mentally healthy during the long journey. Maybe it was because he missed Earth more than he wanted to admit, missed the feel of real wind and real sunlight instead of the artificial versions the ship provided. Or maybe it was because he was 32 years old and had never been in love. Not really, not the kind of love that poets wrote about, and that made people willing to travel across the galaxy together. He had dated, sure, and he liked some of those women quite a bit, but there had never been that moment when he knew, absolutely knew, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with someone. The stars outside the window didn't care about his problems, of course. They just kept shining their ancient light across the void, mostly from suns that had died long before humans existed. Some of that light had been traveling for millions of years just to reach his eyes at this moment, carrying the last message from worlds that might have had their own hopes and dreams and lonely people looking up at their own night skies. Jake straightened up and looked around the empty observation deck, feeling suddenly foolish for his self-pity. Here he was, living through one of the greatest adventures in human history, helping to establish a new world for his species, and all he could think about was his own loneliness. Millions of people back on Earth would have given anything to be in his position, to be chosen for this mission, to be part of humanity's expansion into the stars. But knowing he should feel grateful didn't make the loneliness go away. It just made him feel guilty about feeling lonely in the first place. He walked over to the center of the observation deck, where the biggest window gave him a view in all directions, surrounding himself with the infinite darkness and distant stars. The rational part of his mind knew that he was being dramatic and silly, but the emotional part didn't care about rationality right now. He was tired of eating meals by himself in the cafeteria while couples sat together at other tables. He was tired of going to social events and standing by himself while everyone else danced with their partners. He was tired of lying in his narrow bunk every night staring at the ceiling and wondering if he would spend the rest of his life alone. The universe was so big, so full of possibilities and wonders, and maybe even other forms of life, but here he was stuck on one ship with 1,000 people, and none of them was right for him. What were the odds of that? What were the odds that in all the vastness of space, there wasn't someone out there who would be perfect for him? Someone who would understand his jokes and share his dreams and want to build a life together. Jake knew he was about to do something stupid, but he didn't care anymore. The observation deck was empty. The ship was quiet, and he was alone with his thoughts and the stars. He looked up at the largest window, at the millions of points of light scattered across the darkness, and took a deep breath. "Anyone out there looking for a husband?" he called out loudly, his voice echoing off the curved walls of the observation deck. "I'm honest. I'm loyal. I'm reasonably good-looking according to my mother, and I make a decent living flying spaceships." The words hung in the air for a moment before fading into the ship's ambient noise, and Jake felt his face get hot with embarrassment. Good thing nobody had been around to hear that little outburst, or he would never live it down. The crew would be telling stories about Captain Morrison talking to empty space for the rest of the journey. He was about to head back to his quarters when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside the observation deck. Jake turned toward the entrance, expecting to see one of the night shift workers come and check on something, but instead he saw Tom Hayes, the ship's security chief, walking in with concerned expression on his face. "Everything okay in here, Jake?" Tom asked, looking around the empty deck. "I heard someone shouting and wanted to make sure there wasn't a problem." Jake felt his embarrassment get worse, but he tried to play it off casually. "Just me talking to myself. Tom, nothing to worry about. Sometimes the quiet gets to you, you know?" Tom nodded understandingly, but Jake could see the worry in the other man's eyes. Space madness was a real concern on long journeys like this, and talking to yourself loudly enough for someone to hear you from the corridor was definitely a warning sign that the medical team would want to know about. "Yeah, I know what you mean," Tom said carefully. "The emptiness out there can make you feel pretty small sometimes. You sure you're feeling all right, though? No problem sleeping or eating or anything like that?" "I'm fine, really," Jake assured him, even though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just having one of those nights where you wonder what the point of it all is, you know? But I'm good, I promise. Thanks for checking, though." Tom studied his face for another moment, then nodded and headed back toward the corridor. "Get some sleep, Jake. Tomorrow's another day, and who knows what it might bring." As the security chief's footsteps faded away, Jake looked back out at the stars one more time. Tom was right. Tomorrow was another day, and they were still 3 years away from reaching Haven Prime. Maybe things would look different in the morning. Maybe he would find a way to make peace with the situation and stop feeling sorry for himself. But as he headed back to his quarters through the ship's quiet corridors, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed when he called out to the universe. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It was probably just his imagination, but for the first time in months, he felt like maybe he wasn't quite as alone as he had thought. 3 days had passed since Jake's embarrassing moment in the observation deck, and he was trying his best to forget about it and focus on his work. The Endeavor's flight systems needed constant monitoring and adjustment, especially the navigation computers that kept them on course toward Haven Prime. Jake spent his morning shift running diagnostics on the backup thrusters and checking fuel consumption rates. Routine work that usually helped keep his mind off his personal problems. But today felt different somehow, though Jake couldn't explain why. There was a strange tension in the air, like the feeling you get right before a thunderstorm when all the hair on your arm stands up. Several crew members had mentioned having weird dreams the past few nights, and the ship's long-range sensors had been picking up odd readings that the science team couldn't quite explain. Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's chief scientist, had briefed the senior officers that morning about some unusual energy signatures they had detected in nearby space. Nothing dangerous, she had assured them, probably just natural phenomena like solar flares or magnetic fields from distant stars. But Jake had seen the worried expression on her face when she thought nobody was looking, and he had a feeling there was more to the story than she was telling them. Meanwhile, far beyond the range of human sensors, something was indeed watching Endeavor with great interest. The Crimson Fleet had been drifting through this sector of space for over 200 years, their massive ships running silent and dark to avoid detection by the various species that called this region home. The fleet was ancient, older than most civilizations in the galaxy, and it carried the last survivors of a race that had once ruled dozens of star systems before their home world was destroyed in a war so terrible that even the winners had lost everything that mattered. Commander Elena Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Dark Star, studying the readings her sensors had gathered about the human vessel. She had lived for over 800 years, had fought in countless battles across the galaxy, had seen entire worlds burn and watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. Nothing should have surprised her anymore, certainly not another primitive species fumbling their way through space in a crude metal ship. But something about these humans was different, something that made her feel emotions she had thought were long dead. Her lieutenant, Marcus, had detected their transmissions 3 days ago and brought them to her attention as a possible target for raiding. The humans were clearly weak by vampire standards. Their ship was slow and poorly armed, and their life force would provide nourishment for the fleet for months. Elena had been ready to approve the attack when she heard the transmission that changed everything. It was a simple message, barely a few seconds long, broadcast from their observation deck on what humans call an open frequency. Most species use such broadcasts for navigation data or emergency signals, but this one was different. It was personal, desperate, and heartbreakingly honest. Anyone out there looking for a husband? I'm honest, I'm loyal, I'm reasonably good-looking according to my mother, and I make a decent living flying spaceships. Elena had played the recording dozens of times over the past 3 days, analyzing every word and tone for hidden meanings or deceptions, but there weren't any. The voice belonged to a male human who sounded young and lonely and genuinely hopeful that someone, somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, might want to share their life with him. 800 years of warfare and bloodshed had not prepared Elena for that kind of innocent hope. She had forgotten what it felt like to want something more than just survival, to dream of connection and companionship, rather than conquest and feeding. The human simple question had awakened something in her that she had buried so deep she thought it was gone forever. "Commander," Marcus said from his position at the tactical station, "the human ship continues on its current course. They show no signs of having detected our presence. We can move to intercept and disable them within 6 hours." Elena continued staring at the main view screen where the human ship appeared as nothing more than a tiny bit of light against the star field. Her crew was waiting for orders, expecting her to give the command that would begin another routine raid. They had done this thousands of times before, swooping down on unsuspecting vessels to take what they needed and leave no survivors to report their presence. But this time was different, and Elena couldn't explain why even to herself. Maybe it was because she was tired of the endless cycle of violence and death that defined her existence for so many centuries. Maybe it was because the human's transmission had reminded her of who she used to be before the war, before she was changed, before she became something that fed on the life force of others to survive. "Commander?" Marcus prompted again, clearly confused by her hesitation. "Stand down," Elena said finally, her voice carrying the authority that came from centuries of command. "We will not attack the human vessel." The bridge fell silent, except for the low hum of the ship's systems. Elena could feel the surprise and confusion radiating from her crew, but none of them would dare question her orders directly. She was their commander, their war bride, the one who had led them through countless battles and kept them alive when other fleets had fallen to various enemies across the galaxy. "Instead," Elena continued, "prepare my personal fighter. I will approach their ship alone." Now Marcus did speak up, his concern overriding his usual discipline. "Commander, that is extremely dangerous. We know nothing about their weapons or defenses. They could capture or destroy you before we could respond." Elena turned to look at her lieutenant, seeing the genuine worry in his ancient eyes. Marcus had served under her command for over 300 years, had followed her into battles that should have killed them both, had never once questioned her judgment or tactical decisions. If he was expressing concern, it meant the situation was truly unprecedented. "I have made my decision," Elena said firmly. "The humans pose no threat to us. Their ship is lightly armed, and their technology is primitive compared to ours. If they attempt to harm me, I can escape easily enough." What she didn't tell Marcus, what she couldn't tell him because she barely understood it herself, was that she had no intention of harming the humans. For the first time in 8 centuries, Elena Voss wanted to do something other than fight, or kill, or take what she needed by force. She wanted to answer that lonely human's question, wanted to see what would happen if someone actually said yes to his hopeful plea. An hour later, Elena was strapped into the pilot seat of her personal fighter, a sleek black vessel that could outrun and outmaneuver anything the humans might send against her. The fighter was armed with enough firepower to disable their entire ship if necessary. But Elena had no intention of using those weapons unless she was attacked first. As she flew toward the human vessel, Elena found herself thinking about the war that had destroyed her homeworld and turned her into what she was now. Her people had been much like these humans once, curious and hopeful and eager to explore the galaxy around them. They had built beautiful cities and created art and music and literature that celebrated life in all its forms. But then the Devourers had come, an ancient evil that consumed entire star systems and left nothing but empty space in their wake. Elena's people had fought bravely, had allied themselves with other species, had developed new technologies and strategies to hold back the darkness. In the end, they had won the war and driven Devourers back into the void between galaxies. The victory had cost them everything that made them who they were. To gain the power needed to fight such an enemy, they had allowed themselves to be changed, transformed into something stronger and faster and more deadly than their original forms. They had become vampires, creatures that could live forever, but only by draining the life force from others. Elena had been a young woman when the change happened, barely out of her equivalent of college, with dreams of becoming an artist and maybe starting a family someday. The war had taken all of that away from her, had turned her into a weapon that was too dangerous to ever have the peaceful life she had once wanted. But now, flying through space toward a ship full of humans who still had that innocence and hope she had lost so long ago, Elena felt something stirring inside her that might have been the ghost of her former self. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could find a way to be something other than just a weapon. The human ship grew larger as she approached, and Elena could see it was indeed primitive by vampire standards, but impressively built for such a young species. Their engineering was crude but effective. Their design was functional rather than elegant, and their energy signature suggested they had built their vessel to last for decades rather than just a few years. Elena activated her ship's cloaking system and moved closer, studying the humans' activity patterns and trying to determine which section of their ship might house the male who had sent that transmission. Her sensors detected thousands of life signs aboard the vessel, far more than she had expected, suggesting this was some kind of colony ship rather than just an exploration vessel. That made what she was planning even more dangerous. If something went wrong, if the humans saw her as a threat, she would be putting thousands of innocent lives at risk. But Elena had spent 800 years calculating risks and odds, and something told her these humans were different from the other species the fleet had encountered. Finally, Elena located what appeared to be an observation deck near the front of the human ship, the same section where their transmission had originated. She could detect a single life sign in that area, someone who was alone just as the voice in the recording had sounded. This had to be him, the lonely human who had called out to the universe asking for companionship. Elena deactivated her cloaking system and allowed her fighter to be detected by human sensors, then sent a simple message on their communication frequency. I request permission to come aboard your vessel. I mean no harm to you or your people. The response came quickly, multiple voices talking over each other in obvious panic and confusion. Elena smiled slightly, remembering her own species' first contact with aliens centuries ago and how frightened they had been of the unknown. But underneath the fear, she could hear curiosity and even excitement in some of the human voices. After several minutes of discussion, a single voice came through clearly, calm and steady despite the circumstances. "This is Captain Morrison. You are welcome aboard our ship, but I should warn you that we have defensive capabilities if you intend us harm." Elena's heart, which had not beat with genuine emotion for longer than she could remember, suddenly felt lighter. Captain Morrison. The voice matched the one from the transmission, which meant she had found him, the human who had asked the universe for a wife. "I understand, Captain Morrison," Elena replied, trying to keep her own voice steady. "I am Commander Elena Voss, and I come in peace. I believe you sent a message 3 days ago that I would like to respond to in person." There was a long pause before the human captain replied, and Elena could hear the confusion in his voice. "I'm not sure what message you're referring to, but you're welcome to dock with our ship. We'll meet you in Docking Bay 2. As Elena guided her fighter toward the human vessel's docking bay, she wondered what she would say when she stood face to face with Captain Morrison. How did you explain to someone that you had traveled across space to answer a lonely question they had asked the stars? How did you tell them that their simple hope had awakened something in you that you thought was lost forever? She would find out soon enough. Elena thought as her fighter settled onto the deck of the human ship. For the first time in 800 years, she was about to do something that had nothing to do with war or survival or the needs of her people. She was about to answer a question that someone had asked with their heart rather than their mind. And maybe, just maybe, she was about to discover that it wasn't too late to remember how to live instead of just exist. Jake Morrison stood in Docking Bay 2 wearing his best dress uniform and trying not to show how nervous he felt as he watched the sleek black fighter ship settle onto the deck with barely a sound. The vessel was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, all smooth curves and dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Whatever species had built this ship clearly had technology far beyond anything humans possessed. Behind him, Security Chief Tom Hayes and 6 armed guards waited in defensive positions, their weapons drawn but pointed at the floor in what they hoped was a non-threatening but ready stance. Dr. Lisa Park stood nearby with her medical scanner, eager to collect data on their first contact with an alien species. Captain Rodriguez, the Endeavor's commanding officer, had wanted to handle this meeting himself, but Jake had insisted on being present since the alien commander had specifically mentioned his transmission. The fighter's boarding ramp lowered with a soft hiss, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat as a figure emerged from the ship's interior. Commander Elena Voss was nothing like what he had expected from an alien visitor, and everything he had never dared to dream of in his loneliest moments. She was tall and graceful, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had never doubted their place in the universe. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her hair was long and dark as the space between stars, and her eyes were the deep red of garnets catching firelight. She wore form-fitting armor that looked like it had been crafted by master artists rather than military engineers, black and silver with intricate designs that seemed to shift and change as she moved. But what struck Jake most was not her otherworldly beauty or her obviously advanced technology. It was the way she looked directly at him with those red eyes and smiled, an expression that was both predatory and gentle at the same time. She walked toward their group with measured steps, her hands empty and visible, clearly trying not to appear threatening despite the fact that everything about her radiated danger and power. "Captain Morrison," Elena said, her voice carrying a slight accent that made each word sound like music. "I am Commander Elena Voss of the Crimson Fleet. I believe we have much to discuss." Jake stepped forward, trying to project calm authority despite the fact that his heart was racing. "Welcome aboard the Endeavor, Commander Voss. I have to admit, your message confused me. What transmission were you referring to? Elena's smile widened slightly, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be human. 3 days ago, you stood in your observation deck and called out to Universe, asking if anyone was looking for a husband. I heard your call, Captain Morrison, and I have come to answer it. The silence that followed Elena's words was so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the ship's ventilation system and the soft beeping of Dr. Park's medical scanner. Tom Hayes visibly tensed, his hand moving closer to his weapon, while the other guards exchanged confused glances. Dr. Park's eyes went wide with scientific fascination and personal concern. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment as he remembered his moment of weakness in the observation deck. That was just me being foolish and lonely, he said quickly. I didn't expect anyone to actually hear it, much less respond. But someone did hear it, Elena replied, taking another step closer. Someone who has spent 800 years wandering the galaxy, fighting endless wars and watching civilizations rise and fall. Someone who had forgotten what it meant to hope for something beyond mere survival until she heard a lonely voice calling out to the stars. Dr. Park cleared her throat nervously. Excuse me, Commander Voss, but did you say 800 years? Are you claiming to be that old? Elena turned her attention to the ship's scientist, and Jake could see the ancient weariness in her red eyes. I am what your species might call a vampire, Dr. Park. My people were changed during a great war long ago, transformed into something that could live forever, but only by feeding on the life force of others. We are strong and fast and nearly immortal, but we lost our humanity in the process. Tom Hayes raised his weapon at that revelation, his voice tight with concern. Did you come here to feed on us? Are we in danger? If I wanted to harm you, Security Chief Hayes, your ship would already be destroyed and your crew will be dead. Elena said calmly, not seeming bothered by the weapon pointed at her. I came here because your captain asked the universe for companionship, and I find myself in need of the same thing. I am tired of war and death and endless wandering through the void. Jake stepped between Elena and Tom's weapon, his mind racing as he tried to process everything she had told him. You're saying you came all this way to answer my question seriously? You want to marry me? I want to try, Elena admitted. And for the first time since she had emerged from her fighter, Jake heard uncertainty in her voice. I know how strange this must sound. I am an alien warrior who has lived for centuries, and you are a human pilot who barely knows I exist. But something about your transmission touched a part of me that I thought was lost forever. Dr. Park lowered her scanner and looked at Jake with concern. Captain Morrison, this is clearly a first contact situation that needs to be handled by the proper diplomatic channels. We should contact Earth Command and get instructions on how to proceed. With respect, Dr. Park, Jake said, never taking his eyes off Elena's face. Earth Command is 4 years away by faster-than-light communication. Whatever we decide here, we're on our own. He paused, studying the alien woman who had traveled across space to answer his lonely question. Commander Voss, what exactly are you proposing? Elena's posture relaxed slightly, as if she had been holding her breath, waiting for him to ask that question. I propose that we spend time together, that we learn about each other's cultures and ways of life. I want to understand what it means to be human, and perhaps you'd like to learn about my people and our history. If we find that we are compatible, if we discover that we can care for each other despite our differences, then perhaps we can build something together. And if we're not compatible? Jake asked, then I will return to my fleet and continue my existence as I have for the past 8 centuries, Elena replied simply. But I hope that will not be necessary. Tom Hayes lowered his weapon, but kept it ready. Captain, this could be a trap. We don't know anything about her or her people. For all we know, she's gathering intelligence for an invasion. Elena turned to address the security chief directly. If my fleet wanted to invade your ship or your colony, we would not need to send a single representative to gather intelligence. We have been watching your species for months, studying your technology and capabilities. You are brave and resourceful, but you would not be able to resist us in open combat. That's supposed to make us feel better? Tom asked sarcastically. It is supposed to make you understand that I am here by choice, not as part of some military strategy, Elena explained patiently. I could have taken what I needed from your ship by force, but I chose to come in peace because your captain's transmission offered something I have not experienced in centuries. Hope. Dr. Park stepped forward with her scanner again. Commander, would you be willing to submit to some basic medical tests? Nothing invasive, just external scans to help us understand your physiology. It would help us determine if there are any compatibility issues we should be aware of. Elena looked at Jake questioningly, and he nodded his agreement. That sounds reasonable. Dr. Park is our chief medical officer, and anything she learns will remain confidential unless you give permission to share it. Very well. Elena agreed, standing still as Dr. Park ran her scanner over her body. The device beeped and chirped as it collected data, and Jake could see the doctor's eyebrows raising as she read the results. Fascinating, Dr. Park murmured. Your bone density is nearly 3 times that of a human. Your muscle fibers are completely different from ours, and your cardiovascular system is unlike anything in our medical databases. But the most interesting thing is that your basic genetic structure has similarities to ours, as if our species might have had a common ancestor millions of years ago. Elena nodded. That is possible. My people explored this galaxy long, before yours developed space travel. We may have encountered your world in its early stages and left genetic markers behind, or perhaps we both evolved from species that originated in the same region of space. Jake found himself staring at Elena as Dr. Park continued her scans, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what his rational mind was telling him. This beautiful, dangerous alien woman had traveled across space to answer his desperate question, was offering him companionship and possibly love, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about human culture. It was insane, impossible, and potentially catastrophic for both their species if something went wrong. It was also the most romantic thing that had ever happened to him, and Jake realized that despite all the logical reasons he should be cautious, he wanted to say yes. Commander Voss, he said finally, I accept your proposal. I would like to spend time with you and learn about your people, with the understanding that both of us can end this arrangement at any time if it doesn't work out. Elena's smile was radiant, transforming her face from merely beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. Thank you, Captain Morrison. I promise I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the chance you are giving me. Tom Hayes holstered his weapon with obvious reluctance. Captain, I need to file a full report on this incident. Captain Rodriguez is going to want to speak with both of you, and probably with Commander Voss's superiors as well. My fleet will not interfere with our arrangement unless I request assistance or fail to report in at regular intervals, Elena assured him. They understand that this is a personal matter, not a military one. Dr. Park finished her scans and stepped back, looking both excited and worried. I'll need to run a full analysis of these readings, but I don't see any immediate health risks from prolonged contact between your species and ours. However, I would recommend regular medical monitoring, as we learn more about your physiology. Jake looked around the docking bay at his colleagues, seeing mixture of concern, fascination, and disbelief on their faces. He understood their feelings because he was experiencing all of them himself, but underneath the confusion and uncertainty was something he hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about the future. Well then, Jake said, turning back to Elena with what he hoped was a confident smile, I suppose we should start with dinner. Are you able to eat human food, or do you have special dietary requirements I should know about? Elena's expression became slightly sad. I have not been able to taste solid food for over 8 centuries, Captain Morrison. My people survive by absorbing life force directly from other beings. But I would be honored to sit with you while you eat and learn about your customs. Jake felt a chill at her words, but he also heard the longing in her voice, the desire to experience something she had lost long ago. Maybe we can find a way to change that, he said impulsively. Dr. Park is brilliant with biological problems, and if we're going to make this work, we'll need to solve the practical issues as well as emotional ones. You would do that for me? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I would try, Jake replied honestly. After all, you traveled across space to answer my question. The least I can do is see if we can find a way for you to enjoy a good meal. For the first time since she had emerged from her fighter, Elena looked genuinely vulnerable, as if she was afraid to hope for something she wanted so desperately. Then let us begin, Captain Morrison. I have 800 years of loneliness to overcome, but perhaps together we can find a way to build something new. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's arrival aboard the Endeavor, and Jake could hardly believe how much his life had changed. What had started as the strangest first date in human history had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. Elena was brilliant, funny, and surprisingly gentle despite her centuries of warfare, and Jake found himself falling for her in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. They had established a routine of spending their evening hours together, sharing meals even though Elena could only watch Jake eat while she described the foods her people had enjoyed before their transformation. She told him stories of distant worlds and ancient civilizations, while he showed her human movies and music that made her laugh with delight. Dr. Park had been working tirelessly to find a way to restore Elena's ability to taste food, experimenting with different compounds and energy frequencies that might temporarily reverse some effects of her vampiric transformation. But their peaceful courtship was about to come to an abrupt end. Deep in space, Admiral Kane was growing increasingly concerned about Elena's prolonged absence from the fleet. She had been scheduled to return after a routine reconnaissance mission 3 weeks ago, and her failure to report back was completely out of character for his most reliable commander. Kane was ancient even by vampire standards, having lived for over 1,500 years and led the Crimson Fleet through countless battles across the galaxy. He was tall and imposing with silver hair and eyes like burning coals, and his presence commanded absolute respect from every warrior under his command. Elena had been like a daughter to him since he had personally overseen her transformation during the war, and her unusual behavior was both puzzling and deeply troubling. "Sir," reported Captain Marcus from the bridge of Kane's flagship, "we have located Commander Voss's fighter. It is docked with the human vessel in Sector 7, the same ship she was supposed to investigate and report on." Kane studied the tactical display, showing the human colony ship, and Elena's fighter attached to it like a tiny parasite. The humans had made no attempt to leave the area or change course, which suggested they were not aware of the fleet's presence in the region. More importantly, Elena's ship was intact and showed no signs of damage, which meant she was almost certainly alive and unharmed. How long had she been aboard their vessel? Kane asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Based on our tracking data, she docked with a human ship 23 days ago and has remained there since," Marcus replied. "Her fighter systems are active and she could leave at any time, but she has made no attempt to depart or contact us." Kane felt a cold anger building in his chest. In all the centuries Elena had served under his command, she had never disobeyed orders or failed to report in according to schedule. She was disciplined, reliable, and utterly devoted to the fleet and its mission of survival. For her to abandon her duties and spend weeks aboard an alien vessel was inconceivable unless something had gone terribly wrong. "Prepare the battle group," Kane commanded. "We will investigate the situation personally." "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "our standing orders are to avoid contact with primitive species unless absolutely necessary. If we reveal ourselves to the humans, it could complicate our operations in this sector." "Commander Voss is worth more to this fleet than 1,000 primitive humans," Kane replied coldly. "If they have somehow captured or corrupted her, they will pay the price for their interference." Kane had lived through the loss of his homeworld, had watched his entire civilization transform itself into something monstrous in order to survive, had led the remnants of his people through centuries of wandering and warfare. Elena represented something precious to him, a connection to the person he had been before the war changed everything. If the humans had harmed her or somehow turned her against her own people, Kane would make sure they regretted the day they were born. 2 hours later, the Endeavor's long-range sensors detected multiple ships approaching their position at high speed. Jake was in the observation deck with Elena, showing her the constellations that were visible from Earth and explaining how humans had used them for navigation before they developed spaceflight technology. Elena was fascinated by human mythology and the stories different cultures had created to explain the patterns of stars in their night sky. "Your people have such wonderful imaginations," Elena said, pointing at a cluster of stars Jake had identified as part of the constellation Orion. "My people saw those same stars as a great warrior, too, but we called him a hunter of souls and told stories about his battles with cosmic demons." Jake was about to respond when the ship's alert system activated, filling the observation deck with flashing red lights and the sound of klaxons. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, tense with barely controlled panic. All senior staff report to the bridge immediately. We have multiple unknown vessels approaching our position, and they are not responding to our hail attempts. Elena's face went pale as she heard the announcement, and Jake could see fear in her red eyes for the first time since he had met her. "The fleet has found us," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "Admiral Kane has come for me." Jake took her hand, surprised by how cold her skin felt despite her normally warm temperature. "Is that bad? I thought they were your people, your family." "They are," Elena replied, standing up quickly and pulling Jake toward the exit. "But Kane will see my presence here as a betrayal of my duties and a threat to the fleet's security. He will demand that I return immediately, and if I refuse, he will consider the Endeavor and everyone aboard it to be enemies." They hurried through the ship's corridors toward the bridge, passing crew members who were rushing to emergency stations with expressions of fear and confusion. Jake had seen the crew handle dangerous situations before, but this was different. They were facing an unknown alien force with technology far superior to their own, and everyone could sense that their lives hung in the balance. On the bridge, Captain Rodriguez was studying the tactical display with growing alarm. "Report," Jake called out as he and Elena arrived. "We have 7 ships approaching our position," Rodriguez replied grimly. "They're much larger than Commander Voss's fighter, and our sensors indicate they have weapons and defensive systems that are centuries ahead of our technology. If they decide to attack us, we won't be able to offer much resistance." Elena moved to the communication station and began working with controls. "I need to contact Admiral Kane directly. Perhaps I can explain the situation and convince him that no harm has been done." "Commander," Dr. Park said from her science station, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships. They're definitely warships, designed for combat rather than exploration. One of them is nearly 10 times the size of the Endeavor." Elena finished configuring the communication system and opened a channel to the fleet flagship. "Admiral Kane, this is Commander Elena Voss requesting permission to speak with you directly." The response came immediately, Kane's voice filling the bridge with his authority and barely contained anger. "Commander Voss, you will explain your prolonged absence from the fleet and your unauthorized contact with this primitive species. You have 30 seconds. Elena took a deep breath before responding. "Admiral, I have been conducting an extended cultural exchange with the humans aboard this vessel. They are not primitive as we initially believed, and they pose no threat to our operations. I request permission to continue my mission." "Your mission was reconnaissance and reporting, not cultural exchange," Kane replied coldly. "You will return to your ship immediately and report to the flagship for debriefing. The human vessel will be destroyed to eliminate any security risk." Jake felt his blood run cold at those words, and he could see similar reactions from the rest of the bridge crew. Elena's face showed a mixture of pain and determination as she prepared to respond. "Admiral, I respectfully request that you reconsider. These humans have shown me kindness and hospitality. They have harmed no one and seek only to reach their new colony world in peace. They do not deserve to die for my choices. Your choices have already endangered this fleet by exposing us to an unknown species," Kane replied, his anger now obvious in his voice. "You will return immediately, or I will consider you to have deserted your post and acted accordingly." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "This is Captain Rodriguez, commanding officer of the Endeavor. Admiral Kane, we mean no harm to you or your people. Commander Voss came to us in peace, and we have treated her with respect and courtesy. Surely we can resolve the situation without bloodshed." Kane's response was swift and harsh. "Humans do not negotiate with the Crimson Fleet. You will surrender Commander Voss immediately, or face the consequences of harboring a deserter." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a look of resolve that Jake had never seen before. "Admiral, I invoke the ancient right of personal challenge. I claim that my actions have been honorable and just, and I demand the opportunity to prove it through combat trial." The bridge fell silent as everyone waited for Kane's response. Jake had no idea what Elena was talking about, but he could tell from her expression that she had just done something desperate and dangerous. "You invoke challenge, right?" Kane's voice carried surprise and something that might have been approval. Very well, Commander. The ancient laws will be observed. You and your human allies will be given the opportunity to prove your worthiness through trial by combat. If you succeed, you may choose your own path. If you fail, the human vessel will be destroyed, and you will face judgment for desertion. Elena turned to look at Jake and the other humans on the bridge. I am sorry, she said quietly. I have just committed all of you to face combat trials against vampire warriors. It was the only way to prevent Kane from destroying your ship immediately. Jake stared at her in disbelief. What exactly does that mean? It means, Elena replied, her voice heavy with regret, that you and selected members of your crew will have to fight trained vampire warriors in single combat. The trials are designed to test courage, skill, and worthiness. They are not designed to be survivable for ordinary beings. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. And if we refuse to participate? Then Kane will destroy the Endeavor immediately, Elena said simply. This way, at least you have a chance. Jake looked around the bridge at his fellow humans, seeing fear and determination in equal measure on their faces. They were facing an impossible situation with odds stacked heavily against them, but Elena had bought them time and at least a slim hope of survival. When do these trials begin? Jake asked. Kane's voice came through the communications system one more time. Prepare yourselves, humans. The trials will commence in 6 hours. Choose your champions wisely, for their performance will determine the fate of everyone aboard your vessel. As the communication channel closed, Jake realized that everything he and Elena had built together over the past 3 weeks was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. The question was no longer whether they could build a life together, but whether any of them would survive long enough to find out. The 6 hours passed faster than Jake had ever thought possible. The Endeavor's main cargo bay had been cleared and transformed into an arena according to the ancient vampire traditions that Elena explained with growing dread. The combat trials were not meant to be fair fights, but tests of worthiness where weaker beings could prove their courage and determination against superior opponents. Jake had volunteered to be the primary champion for humanity. Despite Elena's protests and the concerns of his crew, Captain Rodriguez had wanted to take his place, arguing that as commanding officer it was his responsibility. But Jake had insisted Elena was his responsibility now, and he would not ask others to risk their lives for his personal choices. Tom Hayes would fight as the second champion, representing the ship's security forces, while Dr. Lisa Park had volunteered for the third trial, which Elena explained would test wisdom rather than physical combat. The vampire trials always came in groups of 3. Strength, courage, and wisdom, designed to evaluate a species' complete worthiness rather than just their fighting ability. Admiral Kane's flagship had docked with the Endeavor, and the ancient vampire lord himself had come aboard with 2 of his most skilled warriors. Kane was even more imposing in person than his voice had suggested, tall and commanding with silver hair and eyes that burned like stars. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and everyone in the cargo bay could feel the weight of his centuries pressing down on them. These are your champions? Kane asked, studying Jake, Tom, and Dr. Park with obvious disdain. They are barely more than children, and weak ones at that. This trial is meaningless. Elena stepped forward, her own warrior bearing matching Kane's despite the obvious difference in their ages and experience. They are stronger than they appear, Admiral. Humans have qualities that cannot be measured by physical prowess alone. Kane's expression softened slightly as he looked at Elena, and Jake could see genuine affection beneath the anger. Commander Voss, you were like a daughter to me after the transformation. I taught you everything you know about warfare and survival. Why are you throwing away 8 centuries of loyalty for these primitives? Because they reminded me what it means to hope instead of just survive, Elena replied quietly. Jake asked the universe for companionship, not conquest. He offered kindness to a stranger, not suspicion or fear. His people have shown me that it is possible to live for something other than war. Kane studied Jake with new interest, as if seeing him for the first time rather than just dismissing him as another inferior alien. You are the one who called out to the stars asking for a wife. Jake stepped forward, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. I am Admiral Kane. I was lonely and foolish, but Elena heard my call and answered it. She has become precious to me, and I would fight anyone who tried to take her away. Precious to you? Kane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Do you have any idea what she is, human? Elena Voss has personally destroyed entire fleets, has conquered worlds, has killed thousands of beings across the galaxy. She is a weapon forged in the fires of universal war, and you think she can be tamed by your simple affection. I don't want to tame her, Jake replied steadily. I want to love her for who she is and who she chooses to become. Elena told me about her past, about the war and the transformation, and everything your people sacrificed to survive. I don't judge her for what she had to do. I admire her for carrying that burden for so many centuries. Kane's eyes narrowed as he studied Jake's face, looking for deception or weakness. And you believe that your love can somehow undo 800 years of conditioning and change your fundamental nature? I believe that Elena is still the person she was before the war, underneath all the armor and weapons and centuries of fighting. Jake said, she told me about the art she wanted to create, the family she dreamed of having before everything changed. Maybe those dreams don't have to stay buried forever. For the first time since entering the cargo bay, Kane looked genuinely surprised. He turned to Elena with something approaching wonder in his ancient eyes. You told him about the time before? About who you were? Elena nodded, her own expression vulnerable. He asked about my life, about what made me happy before I became a warrior. I found myself remembering things I thought I had forgotten, dreams I thought were dead. Jake listened without judgment, without fear, as if those dreams still mattered. Kane was silent for a long moment, studying both Elena and Jake with an intensity that made everyone in the cargo bay nervous. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. The trials will proceed as scheduled, Kane announced, but I will modify them to better test what you claim about human nature. If your people can demonstrate the qualities Elena speaks of, if they can show courage and wisdom and genuine care for others, then perhaps there is something worth preserving here. The first trial began immediately. Kane's champion was a vampire warrior named Victor, who had served the fleet for over 400 years. He was fast, strong, and skilled with weapons that could cut through metal like paper. The trial was not a fight to the death, but a test of courage under pressure. Jake faced Victor in single combat, armed only with a simple metal staff, while the vampire warrior carried his traditional energy blade. The rules were clear. Jake had to survive for 10 minutes and land at least one solid blow on his opponent. If he succeeded, he would pass the trial. If he failed, the testing would end and the endeavor would be destroyed. The fight began with Victor moving so fast that Jake could barely track his movements. The vampire's blade sliced through the air inches from Jake's face, and only his pilot's reflexes saved him from being cut down in the first few seconds. But as the combat continued, Jake began to adapt to his opponent's speed, using his knowledge of human martial arts and his experience with zero-gravity maneuvering to stay alive. Jake couldn't match Victor's speed or strength, but he could think creatively and use tactics that the vampire warrior didn't expect. When Victor lunged forward with his energy blade, Jake dropped flat and swept the vampire's legs, sending him stumbling. When Victor tried to corner him against the cargo bay wall, Jake used the wall itself as a springboard to launch himself over his opponent's head. The 10 minutes felt like hours, but finally the timer sounded and Jake was still standing. More importantly, he had managed to land 2 solid blows with his staff, one to Victor's ribs and another to his shoulder. Victor himself seemed impressed, offering Jake a respectful nod as they separated. The human shows courage and adaptability, Victor reported to Kane. He is weak by our standards, but he fights with intelligence and determination. The second trial was Tom Hayes' test of military leadership and tactical thinking. Instead of single combat, Tom was given command of a simulated battle scenario where he had to defend the Endeavor against multiple vampire fighters using only the ship's limited weapons and defensive systems. Tom surprised everyone, including Kane, by immediately opening communications with the attacking fighters and offering to surrender key sections of the ship in exchange for safe passage for civilians aboard. When the vampire pilots rejected his offer, Tom used the ship's mining lasers and cargo manipulator arms in ways they had never been designed for, turning maintenance equipment into improvised weapons. But what impressed Kane most was when Tom realized that one of the attacking fighters was in trouble, its pilot injured and life support failing. Without hesitation, Tom ordered the Endeavor's medical team to assist the vampire pilot. Even though they were technically enemies in the simulation, he risked his own trial results to save someone who had been trying to destroy his ship moments before. The human commander values life above victory, Kane observed. This is either great wisdom or great foolishness. The third trial was Dr. Park's test of wisdom and scientific understanding. Kane presented her with a complex problem that the vampire fleet had been struggling with for decades. Their birth rate was declining, and their people were slowly dying out despite their immortality. He challenged her to propose a solution using only the resources and knowledge available to humanity. Dr. Park studied the data Kane provided, asked detailed questions about vampire physiology and reproductive cycles, and then presented her findings. The problem, she explained, was not medical but psychological. The vampires have become so focused on survival and warfare that they have forgotten how to live for the future rather than just existing in the present. Your people need hope, Dr. Park told Kane directly. They need reasons to create new life rather than just preserving existing life. You have forgotten how to dream, how to build, how to love. Without those things, any species will eventually fade away no matter how long they can survive individually. Kane listened to her presentation in silence, then asked a single question that surprised everyone. And you believe that associating with humans could somehow restore these qualities to my people? I believe that Elena has already started to rediscover them, Dr. Park replied. She told me about the art she wants to create again, the peaceful life she dreams of having. If one of your people can remember how to hope, others can too. Kane looked around the cargo bay at the humans who had just completed his trials, then at Elena, who was watching the proceedings with obvious anxiety. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of 15 centuries. The trials are concluded, and the humans have proven their worthiness. Commander Voss, you are faced with a choice that will determine the rest of your existence. You may return to the fleet with full honors, your temporary desertion forgiven and forgotten, or you may choose to remain with these humans. But if you do so, you will be cast out forever and your vampiric abilities will gradually fade until you become mortal like them. Elena looked at Jake, her red eyes filled with love and determination. What kind of life will we have together if I remain as I am? I am too strong, too fast, too dangerous for normal human interaction. But if I become mortal, I can truly share your world instead of just visiting it. Jake took her hands in his, not caring that everyone in the cargo bay was watching them. Elena, I would love you however you are, immortal or mortal, vampire or human. But if you choose mortality, I promise I will make every day of our life together worth the sacrifice. Elena turned to Kane with a decision clear on her face. I choose Jake, Admiral. I choose hope over survival, love over duty, and mortality over immortality. For the first time in 800 years, I choose to live instead of just exist. Kane nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. Then let the ancient ritual be observed. By your own choice and in the presence of witnesses, you surrender your immortal nature and accept the consequences of that choice. The transformation began immediately, visible energy flowing away from Elena's body like silver light. She gasped as the change took hold, her pale skin gaining color and warmth, her red eyes shifting to deep brown, her supernatural strength and speed fading to normal human levels. But instead of looking weakened or diminished, Elena looked more alive than Jake had ever seen her. She reached up to touch her face in wonder, feeling sensations that had been dulled by her vampiric nature for centuries. I can feel the warmth of the lights, she whispered in amazement. I can smell the metal of the ship and the scent of Jake's skin. Everything is so vivid, so immediate. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she adjusted to her new mortality. Around them, the cargo bay had fallen silent as vampires and humans alike witnessed something unprecedented. A creature of darkness choosing to become human again. Kane watched the scene with an expression that mixed sadness and approval. Some of my people may choose to follow your path. Elena, if they do, will your humans welcome them? Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Any of your people who choose peace over war, who want to build instead of destroy, will be welcome in our colony. We have room for anyone who wants to help us create something new. As Kane and his warriors prepared to return to their ships, Elena asked one final question. What will you tell the fleet about what happened here? Kane paused in the doorway, looking back at the woman who had been his finest warrior and was now something entirely new. I will tell them that Commander Elena Voss discovered something the fleet has forgotten how to find. A reason to hope for tomorrow instead of just surviving today. Perhaps some of them will understand. 2 months later, Jake and Elena were married in the Endeavor's chapel in a ceremony that blended human traditions with a few vampire customs that Elena remembered from before the war. Dr. Park had succeeded in partially restoring Elena's ability to taste food, and Elena cried with joy as she experienced flavors she had not known for 800 years. As the Endeavor continued toward Haven Prime, Elena worked alongside the colonists to plan their new world, bringing her knowledge of the galaxy to help them avoid dangers and find opportunities. Several vampires from Kane's fleet had requested permission to undergo the same transformation Elena had chosen, and the ship now carried the seeds of a new kind of society where former enemies could become friends and family. Jake held Elena close as they stood together in the observation deck, where he had first called out to the stars asking for companionship. She was mortal now, with a normal human lifespan, but she was also more alive and vibrant than she had ever been as an immortal warrior. Do you ever regret your choice? Jake asked, watching the stars drift past outside their window. Elena smiled and leaned against him, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. How can I regret choosing love over loneliness, hope over despair, life over mere existence? You asked the universe for a wife, and I said yes. Everything else is just details we can work out together. Outside their window, the stars continued their ancient dance across the void, but they no longer looked cold and distant to Jake. They looked like promises of worlds to explore, homes to build, and futures to create together. His simple question had become the first step towards something neither humans nor vampires had imagined possible, a chance to choose hope over fear and build tomorrow instead of just surviving today.